you're actually just the middleman. So I want to purchase it first and then turn around and sell it 50,000. That's the difference between, here's where transactional funding comes in. So that's where transactional funding comes in. It creates a veil. Here you have the A, which is the seller, B is the wholesaler, and the C. They don't have the full money to do that. 1.2 million, pushing the need for transactional funding. Transactional funding, as you know, is mostly like any short-term loan investors use, mostly wholesalers, but doesn't have to be. It is not like collateral protected as far as like, first position loans like PMLs where you have, deed of trust, mortgage, but it is secure because it is escrow protected. So you have like, money goes directly to the title company and to escrow. So it never gets to the wholesaler or whoever is the borrower. So that's why it's protected. So let's just say we have a house here, and this is the seller. And the wholesaler over here goes to the seller. Maybe the seller has some pain points, right? Maybe they're going through, I don't know, divorce, foreclosure, they just inherited the property, they're relocating, so many different reasons why people, sell quickly. So a wholesaler is providing speed and convenience. So that's the value of the wholesaler here. I'm not going to go into wholesale that much. We're talking about transactional funding. So the house, let's just say after it's fully repaired, the ARV is $300,000. But because of these pain points that the seller has, the wholesaler is able to get the property under contract at, say, $150,000. This wholesaler goes, markets this contract. So over here, they have a purchase agreement. And now this wholesaler goes, markets this purchase agreement to an end buyer or an investor for $200,000. So in this scenario, the wholesaler is making the delta of 50,000. That's the difference between the 200,000 and the 150,000. Now, here's where transactional funding comes in. So a wholesaler is making $50,000 on this a deal that he got with the seller, providing speed and convenience. This end buyer is also winning because their purchase is at 200, ARV is 300. Maybe they can rehab it for 20K, turn around and sell it, or keep it in a portfolio, whatever the case may be, right? So this wholesaler wants to protect this 50 grand because, again, it's human nature. If, for example, I have like this glasses over here, and I find these glasses on Amazon, for example, say for $400, and maybe there's a glitch that happens on Amazon's website for some reason, and I see that the landed cost of these glasses, I already thought it was a great deal because it's Ray-Bans, good deal. I thought it was a good deal at 400. But for some reason, if I found out that this glasses actually landed cost was only, say, $150, just natural human nature, I start to feel like I'm being ripped off, right? Because I'm like, well, I thought they're making a killing on me, right? Because it's only $150. Same thing happens with this seller. Sometimes if you get to the closing table and this seller was to find out that the day of closing, your assignment contract, so that's what happens on this side. So you have an assignment contract. So if the seller was to find out that on the day of closing, you're actually just the middleman, you're not purchasing the house, and you're assigning it to end buyer, and you're making $50,000 for it, the same phenomenon could happen. They may grow cold feet. They may feel like they're being ripped off. So that's where transactional funding comes in. It creates a veil, kind of a veil between the transactions. So here you have the A, which is the seller, the B is the wholesaler, and then the C. So you have two transactions going on simultaneously. You have the A to B transaction and then the B to C transaction. So a wholesaler goes to someone like myself, a transactional funder, and says, hey, I actually want to protect my $50,000. I don't want the seller to know that I'm making $50,000 on this deal. So I want to purchase it first and then turn around and sell it simultaneously, maybe that same day, to an investor for 200. I already have the investor under contract. I just need the funds to close the A to B side of the transaction. So that way, the seller never sees, here that comes the veil. The seller never sees what goes on the B to C side of it. And so I, as a transactional funder, will look at it and say, okay, so you need 150. So mind you, this whole transaction goes through, obviously a title company. So title company is over here facilitating the transaction. Now you have some title companies that could do what is called a pass-through. Now that used to happen back in the day. Now in today's day, it's being reduced a whole lot. What a pass-through is a title company sometimes will allow the end buyer's funds to pass through to close the A to B side and then simultaneously close the B to C side. In technicality, they don't have the full money to do that, right? Because they're using $200,000 twice to facilitate both transactions. Now, because of regulations and things like that, sometimes most title companies are wanting you to have the 150,000, which is this, the purchase price on this, to close the first leg, even though you're selling it in 15 minutes. So that's what a transactional funder does. So I would say, okay, I will fund this $150,000 so that you can close the A to B. The seller doesn't know. The end buyer also doesn't know what you bought it for. And then you can sell it to him at, the 200 and make the 50. Now, so I would come into a JV agreement with the wholesaler. So I'm the transactional funder here. So I'll come into a JV agreement, which a JV agreement obviously is a joint venture agreement, with the wholesaler and say, hey, I'll provide the funding to close the A to B, but for that, I will charge you 1% of the purchase price. So 150,000 is what is needed. 1% of that, I as a transactional funder will charge $1,500 to use my funds to close the A to B side, protect your 50,000, and so you can sell it to the end buyer. So that's, in a nutshell, is what transactional funding does. So if you're a wholesaler and you need, funds to close the A to B side of your transaction, you can reach out to me at fastdoubleclose.com, fill out the form, and I'll be happy to fund your deal. Now, let's talk about what are the reasons. What are the reasons you think people will need this type of service?
They don't want to see. Usually, they don't want the end buyers. They don't want the seller to see it.
Correct. So that's a big one. Very. So let's talk about use cases.
Well, can you tell the title company to give you blind HUD, or is that illegal?
So yes, so a blind HUD is a good one. So what a blind HUD here is, and there are some states that disclose this or have to disclose this to the seller if the seller was to ask for, they want to see the buyer side of the transaction, right? So what a blind HUD is a HUD is Housing Urban Development. It's a standardized closing document that all title companies use to show all the debits and credits on a transaction, right? And so on one side you have the seller side, and then the other side you have the buyer side. What a blind HUD is, it separates those two sides. So the buyer only sees the numbers on his side, and the seller only sees the numbers on his side. So what that does, the seller only sees, okay, I'm selling the property at the purchase price that I talked about, never see what the other side is, and vice versa. Now, in actuality, that could work. So most oftentimes, when you're like 20,000, 30,000, you can use a blind HUD. Now, there are some instances, and we'll talk about some use cases where a blind HUD doesn't work, and the wholesaler will still need to do a double close. So, for example, we talked about one. You said the seller
doesn't want to see.
Doesn't
see what they make, right?
Okay, so assignment. The wholesaler wants to protect his profits. So profits protection. A blind HUD can work for some instances. An instance where a blind HUD doesn't work is if the end buyer has some restrictions. So sometimes, if you're, as the wholesaler, if you're selling to an end buyer who is, if you're buying a REO property, a real estate owned property, or like bank owned, or a HUD property, you cannot wholesale those types of properties, right? So you have to actually buy the property first and have full ownership before you can sell it to an end
I think I
buyer.
have a good question.
Okay.
Okay. I have this direct seller, right?
Mm-hmm.
For 200.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm gonna wholesale it to him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 300, right?
Okay.
100K, whatever.
Yeah.
But now we are under contract to close, and you're gonna help me do whatever you need to do, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the transactional, the assignment fee, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm protected. Now he on closing day, okay, hey, I need an extension for 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
What happens? Is there extra fees charged? Because now I have this house and we didn't close on time.
So that's the beautiful thing about transactional funding. Because me as a transactional funder, I am not wiring my funds until title tells me we're clear to go, we're good to go. So my funds a lot of times is only out for like an hour because I'm wiring the funds. They close 15 minutes. They do the other chain side of the transaction, and then they wire my funds back. So if closing doesn't happen that day, I just
Okay,
I
that's that.
I just say, okay, no worries. Let me know when closing happens. I'm ready to fund. So they, like that is the wholesaler, seller, and title company probably will require them to have an amendment to amend the closing date and things like that. I'm just waiting over here, waiting for when everything is right for me to fund. So it doesn't affect me, right? Um, Another use case. So we talk about like end buyer restrictions. So buyer restrictions. So like we talked about like hot properties, another buyer restriction, a very like strong one is hedge funds. So if you're as a wholesaler selling the property to a hedge fund buyer, they require full ownership before you actually can sell them that house. Even if it's a great deal for them, they want it, they require you to own the property first. So these are scenarios where a blind HUD wouldn't work because you actually have to have ownership. A blind HUD will only work to protect the seller. It doesn't to protect the seller from seeing your profits, right? The buyer is always going to see how much he is paying in an assignment fee. So a blind HUD doesn't protect you from the buyer side because the assignment fee appears on the buyer side of the HUD. So buyer protection, buyer restrictions is another one. Another big one that has been, and in my opinion, is going to continue to increase the volume of double closes per thousand transactions is regulation. So here recently, there's an attack on wholesaling, right? A lot of states are starting to crack down on wholesaling. So you have states like Illinois that says, hey, you can only do one wholesale transaction per year, and after that, you have to have a license to wholesale. You have to have other criterias, right? And so if you're in that state and you're running a full-time wholesale operation, obviously you're doing more than one wholesale transaction a year. So you do the one, and then every other wholesale transaction you do after that, you have to double close everything. And so regulation is really pushing the need for transactional funding. You have like so many different states. I think there's like 20 states right now that have some form of regulation or
Yeah.
restriction or the other. So per 1,000 transactions, maybe today there's like, I don't know, maybe 5% of transactions of wholesale transactions that need like double closing. So like 50 in every 1,000. And by 2030, I think that number will be like quadruple because of these factors, mainly the regulation. But these are some of the use cases for like transactional funding. Another thing with transactional funding, so it's not just like the facilitating the A to B and the B to C. When this contract, to make this contract binding, you need what is called earnest money, right? EMD. So EMD is a good faith deposit that goes to the contract to make it legally binding. It can be as low as $1, but if you're really trying to compete, you need to be at like 2,000, 5,000, things like that. So this guy, the wholesaler, may have wanted to put a, I don't know, $2,500 EMD to secure this contract. Now, if he's a newbie wholesaler, maybe he has that $2,500, maybe he doesn't. Again, he can come to me as a transactional funder and say, hey, I have this great deal. I need $2,500 to fund or to make this contract binding. So I again have a JV agreement in a EMD. There are other things like assignments of EMD and things like that. But same concept. I provide this EMD to title company, make this legally binding, and when he sells the property to, even if it doesn't double close, when he sells it to an end buyer, I get whatever fee I agreed on the JV.
What are we charging for transactional funding right now?
1%.
1% for
Yeah.
transactional funding, no additional fees.
No junk fees, there's
Admin fees.
no admin fees, no underwriting fee, none of that. And we can close on the same day if all things are in place. So if you have a buyer and seller contract, so you have the A to B and the B to C, and both transactions are happening at the same title company, those really are my big requirements. And the end buyer's EMD is in.
What is the EMD fees?
EMD varies, to be honest, because they all just like to your question earlier, right? Like you were saying, hey, if there's delays, does it affect the fee? It doesn't for double close, but for EMD, it could, because EMD could be like, hey, we're waiting 30 days to close. Now, if there was something that came up, maybe they need a survey, T19, whatever, and it's pushed back to 45 days. Now that's my money that's sitting in escrow for that long, right? So it could affect. So EMD varies. Again, it also varies by amount. If it's $1,000 and you have a flat, 10% or 5%,
Because
I'm not funding that for 50 bucks,
if they're starting out, right?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people need that, especially like newbies starting out, especially to compete, because you have a lot of big guys out here that are putting $5,000 non-refundable EMDs. Like Christina. It's interesting. It happens on both ends too. As a newbie, they need it, but also guys that have scaled and have like a huge operation, maybe they're doing, I don't know, 15, 20 deals a month. Multiply $2,500 or $5,000 EMD times 20 deals, it really adds up, and it amortizes their business in a sense where it's like, hey, they have X amount out. They just go find a transactional funder like myself and, free up capital, working capital for them.
What would you say your average loan amount is though on transactional funding?
In Houston, so it depends on the market, right? So again, when you're wholesaling properties, it all comes down to, like, wholesaling properties in Houston, the average is like 300, 350. That is average median price housing, right? 300, 350. And so obviously the A to B, the wholesale contract has to be significantly less for it to be a deal. So I see on average 200 per transaction, yeah. So yeah, profit protection on both sides, because also the end buyer, if the end buyer sees you're making 50K, they may try to negotiate you even down. It's like, hey, you're making too much. And then also on the seller side, so profit protection, buyer restrictions, regulation. I've also had people come to me to do transactional funding for when they're refinancing their commercial property, or so that's another use case. It's a really specific one though, refi on property. So like I had a guy who owned a commercial retail building and had like $800,000 of debt on the original in first position. And he was refinancing at 1.2 million, and the new lender required him to come to the closing table with 4 points, which was about 60K or something like that. And so he came to me as a transactional funder and say, hey, give me the 60K, I'm refinancing, I'm making 1.2 when I refi, so I'm making 400 because it's the difference between 1.2 and 800, and I'll pay you, I'll pay you $5,000 for providing the points. And it was same day closing. Again, it's not a double close because it's one transaction.
That's weird. On refis, they make you put up the money before you get it back.
I know it's weird, right? But the lender, the new lender requires them to put it up because they want you to have. It's their origination cost, but they also want you to have skin in the game, before they lend. So, yeah.
Lenders, man, they're the ones that make all the money.
So
Yeah.
they
Lenders-
don't take it on the table closing.
Yeah.
So you have to come with it instead.
Yeah, you have to come with it.
Good to know.
That's and good point, because sometimes they call this like table funding because it's like it's just happening on there. So Yep, this is like transactional funding. You also have like seller carryback. Let me see if I can explain this using, no, maybe. Okay, let me create a new schematic.
And most people are charging 1.5%.
Yeah, it varies. Like especially when you go up to like double closes, like so that's why it's to your question, like how much is it? In Texas it's like 200. But if you're in like Seattle, Washington, you see double closes as much as 800, a million. And when you go up to that, some people charge like 2%, sometimes even 3%, because
Yeah.
not a lot of people have a million liquid to, do those kind of things, right?
And then this, to answer this, but this is, so then you're with guys that back you with this, I'm guessing you're just like a broker as well, or are you using?
So I'm self-funded right now.
You're
So
self-funded.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So I'm self-funded. But if deals come across where it's like, I had one that came out that was like 1.5. Obviously, I'll partner with another transactional funder to get that closed. But anything under a million, I am self-funded right now. Or except like, sometimes you may have funds out or things like that. But for the most part.